Hello, and welcome wherever you are. Welcome to the monthly webinar for BPM-D International. Today we'll be discussing process standardization, illusion or requirement for digital transformation, presented by Dr. Kirchmer. And before we get started, I'd like to mention that we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. Please use the control panel on the right side of your screen on the webinar settings there. There should be a question tab, and you can type your questions there at any time during the presentation. Feel free to type your questions there, and we will be answering those at the end. We'll save about 10 or 15 minutes towards the end, hopefully, to answer those questions, as many as we can. And of course, if there's a question that we're not able to get to, you can email it to membership@abpmp.org after the webinar, and we'll be happy to answer as many questions as we can by email in case we don't get to them during the presentation. And after this presentation, within about 48 hours afterwards, we'll be posting the replay recording. That will be posted on the ABPMP website under training, and under training it will be under webinars. So you can go back, and if you're a member of ABPMP and you're a member in good standing, you'll be able to go back and watch that webinar replay for free, just in case you don't have time to finish the whole thing here today or weren't able to attend. And of course, if you're not a member of ABPMP, we suggest you become one, and you'll save on webinars. Otherwise, it's $21 for non-members to view that webinar at any time afterwards. So good little benefit there of being a member. So for now, if everyone's ready, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Kirchmer and give him the controls here. And off we go. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And hello, everybody. My name is Matthias Kirchmer. I have been in that field of process and process management for many years. I've basically built all my career on that. And during the last years, 6, 7, 8 years, I must say we get almost more requests for process standardizations than for the very classical process improvement initiatives. And that is especially the case in the context of digital transformation. And we also then notice that many organizations really struggle with that topic of standardization, which sounds so simple and straightforward, but in practice, that's not an easy initiative. And I thought to structure our today's session into 3 major parts. First, talk a bit about why standardization is so important for transformation in general, but especially for digitalization initiatives. Then we will look at it, how to make it happen, how to deliver the right process standardization, and last not least, talk a bit about how to sustain those standardization results. If you talk today about transformations or major improvement initiatives in companies, there's basically always some kind of digital technology involved. And when we talk then about such digital transformation or digitalizations, then the core of that is, of course, the use of digital technologies to connect products, services, and people. But the value of that digital technology is, at the end of the day, delivered through new or enhanced business processes. So the processes bring the value through the digital transformation. And therefore, it's also not a surprise that one of the big analyst groups came to the conclusion that the companies who realize the full business potential of digital technologies, they have normally relatively formal and well-developed process management discipline in place. And when we talk about a process management discipline, that's referring to the management discipline that moves strategy into people and technology-based execution and does that fast and reliably. And this discipline of business process management creates in an organization the transparency necessary to meet key goals and to mitigate the trade-offs between such goals like quality and efficiency. In a call center process, for example, there are certain steps that are important, but client doesn't really care about them, doesn't really want to pay money for them. So those process parts are improved based on efficiency aspects. Other steps in the project are highly relevant for our clients. They are ready to pay for it, so we optimize them under quality aspects, and process management provides the transparency necessary to combine those two goals, or combine agility and compliance with necessary standards, or helps to find out where we really need to come up with new innovative processes, and where do we need to standardize that and to conserve existing good practices and roll them out into the organization. So that transparency is of course highly relevant if you just here improve and transform one business process. But in most organizations, especially larger companies, many of those processes happen multiple times in the organization, in different product units, in different geographies. And that's always when then this topic about process standardization comes into the game, and to standardize the processes across business units is very important to really scale the benefits of digital transformation. And that already starts with the fact that once you have standardized your processes, it's of course much easier to reuse automation and digitalization components. So you reduce the cost of your digital transformation itself. But even more importantly, you reduce the total cost of ownership because the whole maintenance later on is of course also easier. So standardization already just to make the transformation cost efficient. But more important than that is that the standardization also brings the necessary agility across the company, because if you then need to adjust to new legal requirements, to customer needs, then it's of course much easier to do that one way for the whole company than doing it again and again in every business unit. International companies need to make sure that they also treat their global clients well. That means to give them a consistent experience wherever they deal with the client. Very, very important topic in many standardization initiatives. And last not least, of course, standardization simplifies the management of compliance. We don't need to reinvent the controls and all compliance actions for every business unit, but we have one set of activities in place. So these are just some core examples that show how important process standardization is for transformations in general and for digital transformations in specific. However, having said that, for everybody who has already gone through such a transformation initiatives, you have also seen that you can only standardize till a certain degree, because there is a whole set of factors that just requires some process variation and limits the standardization possibilities. Typical example for that, for those valid reasons for process variations, the fact that you are in different geographies. There may be different legal requirements, and your finance department and your finance processes have to accommodate them. It's not possible to standardize. Or if an organization has very different products. I years ago worked with a company that had building products, and here simple paper products. So the physical characteristics of those products just required quite a few process variations that could just not be avoided. Or if you have a set of channels, if you want to have different ways that clients or suppliers can access the organization, that normally also leads to variations. Or when you serve very different client segments in different markets, they may have such different requirements that would not be possible to standardize some of the client-facing processes. However, what is important at the beginning of such a process standardization initiative, as part of a transformation, is to be very clear what are valid reasons for such variance. And the ones shown here in green, these are key examples for such valid reasons. And in discussions, there will come up many more, and then it's really important to push back to make sure that we get really the best standardization efforts possible. But even if we then have agreed on valid reasons for process variations, it's important to look a bit deeper into the degree of standardization. And that can be done by looking at the level of detail and the level of abstraction that we use to describe our process standard. So the level of detail describing more or less specific what we do, a level of abstraction describing more or less specific how we do things. An example, for your procurement process for office material, you may say, okay, this is something we wanna do the same wherever we do it. So you will define it very much in detail, so have a high level of detail, and you have a system standard in place to execute it. So you describe very clearly how that process is executed. So very little room for variations in different business units. On the other hand, you may have customer relationship processes where you really wanna give people the freedom to deal with the clients how it is best, and there you may define your processes only on a very low level of detail, so give a lot of freedom about what people do, and give them even the freedom regarding tools and execution enablers they use. So stay very relatively abstract, give them some ideas, but let them choose whatever they feel most appropriate. And in every standardization initiative, it's very important to look at the right combination of detail and abstraction to come up with a standardization that really makes sense and brings the benefits we are looking for. And then comes, of course, the question, well, how do we now apply that in practice? How do we define and implement such a standard? And a way of doing that that has proven to work well is the use of so-called process reference models as a starting point for standardization. And such reference models are nothing else than the description of common practices, and can procure such models as a starting point externally, for example, from software or consulting companies, and then adjust them to your organization, or, and that's something we have done in the last years a lot, create something like an internal reference model, global design model that shows for certain business processes how in a common practice situation we execute that in our company. And such a reference model combines the business and the technology content. It basically shows how a specific business process, like a procure-to-pay process, is executed using one or several technologies, like an ERP system or an automation platform. And in that description that you would, of course, adjust to the specific situation in your organization, there you would also mark where are really parts of that process that you want to keep pretty much in standard across all our business units, and where are areas where variants are acceptable based on some of the characteristics we discussed before. And in such a reference model, you can then also guide the level of abstractions, like we work currently in a huge insurance organization, and there is a whole set of processes where we clearly define what kind of technology is used across countries to execute that process. But there's also sub-processes where we explicitly say, okay, this is something here, our payroll system, we leave it up to the countries and they can handle it however it fits best to that country and can use local systems. And this level of abstraction, with that the management of your total cost of ownership of the digital technologies can also be nicely defined and driven through such process reference models, and with them you then can transport the process standard across the different business units, and then in every business unit define how to address those areas where we can have variations. And by the way, that is also then a great entrance point for the transfer of pre-configured software components and integration components, because if we transfer here our standard process, we can also transfer the underlying software. The standardization topic over many years was completely out of this customer-facing processes, but as explained before, the achievement of consistent customer experience across different geographies or across different product units has become a more and more important topic. And That is a topic in general you can, of course, address through such customer or in general stakeholder journey maps, where you identify the touch points of our clients with the organization and the current and the target experience. And if you do that as an integrated customer journey planning, and then you identify the underlying processes that basically make that customer experience happen. And then the areas where you say, okay, here we have local characteristics, and here we want to let people run in the different geographies as they want. You can identify that, and the ones where you say, okay, these are relevant maintenance processes for our global clients. In those areas, you define a more tight standard and enforce that in an transformation initiative. So you start looking at your processes from an outside-in point of view, and then you define for every process areas what degree of standardization you look for. And by the way, it's of course very good for customer journeys, but we have also made a positive experience applying that to supplier journeys, to employee journeys. So the technique really works well, and is then a good entrance point for a real value-driven process standardization. And that's value of standardization is, of course, also always a big topic, especially if then business units have to adjust to a standard, do things differently. There comes always that discussion, yeah, does that really make business sense? And no, we are then so much slower or more expensive, or we cannot scale correctly. To take those topics out of the equation and make sure that the standards we want to enforce really helps and moves us towards our goals. It's really highly recommended to quantify the aspects of such standardization, and we have been doing that very successfully by using in a real pragmatic way such a process simulation, where you see, okay, that's how we work today. If we move towards our standard-based to be, that's are the cost, time, scalability effects that we can expect. And we have, as I said, applied that in a few standardization initiatives, and it was really very interesting to see that in areas where everybody said, no, if we standardize here our repair of those motors, it will upset our clients, it will take ways too long, and we could show that using a standard and using the related standard technologies does not only not make the process worse, but leads to quite a few improvements. So to spend a bit of time on the pragmatic process analytics behind the standardization and the related improvements makes big sense and really brings value to your transformation. And once you are then sure about your standard, you have defined for a specific business unit how to apply the appropriate standard, then of course you use that process approach to to drive the implementation of the standard. And the big pitfall that is there is that, well, everybody talks nicely about the standard, but then in every country, the system configuration is adjusted, people are trained differently, and then you end up with the same or different variants, but you have not made the real progress towards your standardization. So to use those process models, there is the standard-based to drive both system configuration and people change management, and make sure that both are aligned towards your standard. Very, very key, very important for the implementation phase. And once we have implemented our process standards, then comes, of course, the topic, how do we now see that we really work in that standards mode? And that's a point where, again, the discipline of process management can help, and where here process mining approaches can really be powerful, and especially in such a digital transformation environment. Once you went through the transformation and you have your digital technologies available and the data that is in them, then you can, of course, nicely measure, well, how does my design, my process design, look like in practice? Do I really follow that design, or are there lots of variants? We've been working with a big industrial company, and they had process standardization initiatives in their maintenance area, and in that and we had defined together really powerful new maintenance processes, went live with them based on SAP S/4HANA. And then was the question, well, how do we now know that we everywhere really apply those new processes? And that was the point when this process mining came in extremely handy, because we saw that we made a huge step towards this standardization. About 85–90% of the processes are close enough that we can live with that, but there were just over 10% that were different, that deviated from our standards. And we looked into those. We could even show that those processes have a longer cycle time. And when we then determined in which locations those process instances occurred, it was very clear in these locations they always skipped the step of assigning the equipment to the maintenance orders, and that created all kinds of time-consuming issues. And in those areas, there was just not enough time for all the change management, all the training activities. So it could be pretty quickly fixed, and the degree of standardization significantly improved. So that mining can help there a lot. And then, of course, you also see the performance, and see if your standardization really led to the effects that we were looking for. And talking about the effects we are looking for, then the next part of the journey starts. We have then to see, okay, how do we keep those processes on track? How do we make sure that we have not only implemented our standard, but we keep it in place over time and adjust it when required. And that is then the point when a good process management and governance organization comes into the game, of course, with the typical process governance roles, but also with the appropriate underlying tools. And we have already seen a few of those. And such a governance organization is something that most of the companies have in the meantime recognized that they need that. But what is often the issue is that they define then all kinds of roles, the process owners, the stewards, the sponsors, all that. But then people are more or less alone, and they don't really know how they organize that work. How does now the day-to-day job of a process owner looks like? How do we make our governance happen? How do we use all those tools, those modeling repository tools that contain the information about our standards, those mining tools in collaboration with other analytics tools? How do we leverage that to keep our process on track and decide when we have to make the next jump forward? And that's exactly what can be defined the same way we define any other business process. We define governance processes, for example, how a process performance review works, and how often it happens, what kind of tools are used, who's involved in that process. So to formalize that a bit and to make sure that we have a mechanism in place to keep our process standardization working is something that is often underestimated, but a very, very important success factor. And such a governance process is built, as we have seen before, based on a simple tool architecture. Here, just an example for that, that you basically have an modeling and repository guideline environment, so that you can set the top-down guidance for your processes. You define your standard, you define how you use the different technologies, what degree of freedom. And then best to use wherever possible a good bottom-up control mechanism, leveraging appropriate mining tools, as we have discussed that before, and of course an flexible automation environment that can bring ERP components and other software solutions together. And by the way, much of this technology that we see here moves to the cloud. So the real assets are your processes that stay in the company, that describe how you use that software. And that's why the description of your process standards and the description how you leverage which technology to achieve that standard is becoming a real important asset for organizations worth to take care of. And in order to keep such a process management and a governance organization up and running, it has shown to be very helpful to really formalize that a bit and make sure that it's easy to roll out not only the standard itself, but also the way we manage our process standard. And a good way of doing that is to develop something I like to refer to as a BPM playbook with all guidelines, how we work with processes, and specifically how we maintain our standards and how we apply the appropriate governance, and how we then come to new improvement or transformation initiatives when required. And with that, I'm basically at the end of the presentation itself. We have seen that processes deliver the value of transformation, and especially digital transformation initiatives, and that value increases if you have the right standardization involved. And to target the right degree of standardization is an important task in our transformation, and it can be operationalized through the appropriate use of process reference models. And once you apply them to define and implement your standards, it's important to control the effects, the business effects of this standardization, and to quantify those effects through simulation and process intelligence initiatives and tools. And of course, we need to keep those standards in place through the right process governance processes, as we have seen. And all that is pulled together through a value-driven discipline of business process management that helps you to identify what to standardize, to what degree to standardize, and how to keep that standard in place. Thank you very much, and now we have still a bit of time for questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Kirchmer. That was quite intensive there. And I do see that there are a couple of questions here. Let's see if we can find one. Oh, it's okay. That actually was not a question. That was just a statement. If anyone has questions, now would be a great time to ask them. We can go ahead and get them answered right away here. So please type your questions in the chat box. There's it's actually a questions box or a chat box, either one. We'll be monitoring those, and we can go ahead and get your questions answered. So type your question in there, and we'll read that out loud for Dr. Kirchmer to answer. Looks like we've got one here. How do we maintain standardization?
Yeah, that is the topic that comes back to this whole process governance. We have to make sure that we put a governance organization in place where a process owner, on one hand, has all the knowledge about the process standard, and can, if necessary, adjust that standard. And that is something that is normally supported through appropriate process modeling and repository tools. And those process owners and the related governance processes have to make sure that we really then realize and maintain that standard by getting the right visibility how we work today. And if we don't follow our standard process set actions to either come towards that standard or adjust the process design accordingly. And that's, as we have seen before, something that can be supported through appropriate process mining and the conformance management that it brings to the table. But it's key to organize how to govern a process in general, and in a standardization environment, even more important, because then you don't just manage the performance, but you manage the performance and the conformance with your standard.
Excellent. And what are the biggest challenges when you want to put in place standardization, and how would you address those challenges?
Yeah, I mentioned a few of those challenges. I think the key is to define a realistic standard. To have a clear idea what are factors that justify variations first, and second, to what degree of detail and of abstraction do I want to standardize, as we have seen before. So if I have those two topics together, then I already have a clear way forward, and then you can execute on that by using an appropriate modeling approach, so an appropriate approach to define those process standard, and use them basically as company-wide reference models that give guidance to everybody who wants to implement such a standard process, where we really have a clear hard standard that we have to follow, and where are the process components where business unit specific variations are okay.
Okay, and which is the variability acceptable for a standardized process?
By my opinion, there is no general answer to that. It's a great. It's by the way, it's a great question, but I think it needs to be answered in the context of a specific process in a specific organization. You may have in tendons a higher variability in processes that are very close to your client relationship and your client management, that are very close to the ideation in innovation processes, and you may have much less variations when it comes to compliance relevant processes, to finance processes, as long as they're in the same country. So it needs to be defined in the specific context.
Right. Excellent. All right, folks. If you have any more questions, we got just a couple minutes left. Go ahead and type those in real quick, and we'll get your questions answered. You can also email your questions to membership@abpmp.org. And just a reminder, this webinar replay will be available for on-demand access within 48 hours on our website under training and webinars. All right, looks like we've got one last question, sir. Starting with the taxonomy and checking which processes match with the taxonomy, would that be okay as a starting point?
Well, on this level, I would say yes, because if you look at the taxonomy, that is the first component of your reference model, and helps you to make sure that we have the right structure of your processes in place, and to use here reference structure like the APQC models, or whatever reference models and reference structures are out there, makes definitively sense, and then you can go from there the route that I described in this presentation.
Perfect. All righty, well, we're going to wrap up a little early, but any other questions that come through, we will go ahead and make sure to answer those. And so feel free, if you have a couple of last minutes, type in your questions. We'll send those to membership@abpmp.org and get those answered and respond to you in kind. And looks like we got one last question. We've got just a couple minutes left, and we'll wrap this up. So if you're ready, one last question, sir. We have started our process standardization efforts last year, and you've mentioned conformance management. Do you have any tips to have close to 100% conformance like in rollouts?
Huh. Well, I'm always careful talking about 100% solutions. I'm not sure if you will ever achieve 100% conformance to your standard. That's a very ambitious goal. But in order to manage the conformance, I think that the use of an appropriate mining approach, as I described that before, is very helpful, because then you really see the different process instances. And there exists now quite a few mining tools where you can overlay those process instances over your process design, so that you see exactly in which areas do you deviate from your standard, and in which organizational units there are. So then that is a very powerful approach to manage every business units towards that standard. If it's then always possible to get them comply at 100%, that is a different question. But from a direction point of view, this is the way I would go.
Excellent. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. We wish everyone a good afternoon, good evening, and good night. We thank you for attending, and wherever you are in the world, we appreciate your attendance. We would like to thank Dr. Kirchmer for attending, and here at abpmp.org, we'll be placing the replay available within 48 hours. And we'd like to thank everyone, and have a great rest of the day, evening, or night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.